then, so this is the compilers and interpreters within the topic of translators. So a compiler scans the whole program first, then converts the whole file into object code. Now there are actually different parts of the compiler. So there's the electrical analysis, which uses the source program. It uses the source program as the input, so the source code as the input. It removes redundant characters such as the white space, which is stripped out of the program. All comments are removed, so reserved words such as if, then and else are replaced by tokens. The tokens are a fixed length string of binary digits. The variable names are stored for later use, and error messages are outputted if necessary. Prepares code for syntax analysis or parsing. So then there's syntax analysis or parsing, as I've got it in brackets on my notes. So it accepts output from the electrical analysis. The tokens are checked to see that it matches the rules of the programming language. An example is each if has a matching end if. It is able to report a list of the errors in the code. It may also report spurious errors. So that's when the syntax finds an error, it just goes over the code more thoroughly or so. So if it finds it, it goes right. So I've got to find things that are similar to this, and it can. So there's spurious errors. Can't pronounce that word. The spurious errors involve just sometimes they're not errors. So then, but if another thing is that if no errors, the code is then passed on to the code generation. The further detail is added to the symbol table, such as data type, the scope, and the address. Now, for code generation is where the optimization of the code happens, since it makes code as efficient as possible, which increases the processing speed. It reduces the number of instructions. The code is then converted into machine code. The low-level functions are created from each high-level function. Now, for each of the parts of the things, so the electrical analysis, syntax analysis, and the code generation, you can break them down by using this table. So there's the electrical analysis, the syntax analysis, and then the code generation. And then there is also the not during compilation. So there's the optimization occurs, logical errors are detected, tokens are created, spaces are removed, comments are removed, incorrect punctuation is detected. So if you want to have a go at this, just pause the video now and you can have a go at it. Alright then, so for the answers, so for optimization occurs, that is within the code generation. For logical errors are detected, that is not during compilation, so not during compiling. Tokens are created in the electrical analysis stage. Spaces are removed in the electrical analysis, so are the and comments are removed as well. Incorrect punctuation is detected within the syntax analysis. Now, how well did you do? Comment below if you did actually have a go at this. Tell me how well you did. Did you get them all correct, or did you make some mistakes? Now, the advantages of the compiler is the source code is translated once into object code after the program has been compiled. It runs using object code, which is faster than interpreted language, which effectively compiles the code line by line. The end user does not have to find and download an interpreter. Errors are reported to the developer when the program is compiled, as opposed to the end user when they occur. So errors are reported to the developer when the program is compiled, as opposed to the errors being reported to the end user when they occur. The source code can be kept confidential for commercial or security purposes. So, for instance, for the Java thing, for Minecraft or whatever, if you open up the Java file, you've seen that it is, if you try and open it up with Notepad, it's just all, it's all compiled, so it's just in the language of that computer, of the Java thing. So you cannot read that. That is because there's not really any source code within that. You have to, because the only thing that you can really get, I believe, for Minecraft is the mod development kit or something. The Minecraft mod development kit, which has this stuff for making mods. Then there's another advantage is that it improves the code's portability. A compiler can target different processors using the same source code. So that would be just Linux, Mac, and then Windows, so Mac OS and stuff. It does not need to be present in order to run the code. So once something is compiled, that code that gets generated does not need the original code. So you can just pass that on to people. As stated before, I've said the source code can be kept confidential. That is because just the source code isn't with the program when you distribute it. Alright then, so an interpreter converts the source code into intermediate code, then into the object code. So there's a step in between. Each line of code is interpreted and then executed separately in a sequence. If an error is found in a particular line, it will stop the interpretation without translating to the next stage. So error spot, it reports it to the user. User can then fix the error and then then continue the interpretation. Interpreters translate the code one line at a time. This gives them a number of advantages over compilers, including errors are reported as they occur rather than in just one big list at the end, since that's what compilers do. They compile it and then say, oh, we had an error at this location, and then you have to go to that location, fix it, then compile it all over again. An interpreter makes it a lot easier to make the corrections as they appear. You can then fix it. Interpreters use less memory, as only the object code from a single line of source code is held in memory at one time. Interpretation can be restarted from any point when the error is corrected. So as I said before, the programmer gets alerted to an error, and then the error can be fixed by the programmer. Once it's fixed, the programmer can then resume the interpretation. Breakpoints can be inserted into the code to halt operations and display the values currently held in variables. So that it's sort of a bit like a log file. So it's a log file. So breakpoint would probably just be like slash break or something, uh, and then just like, and that might just be related to a subroutine within the interpreter saying display these values. Right then, so the main advantages are that it is better at debugging even, and it uses less memory and it is less prone to crashing. Because with when this is, I'll be comparing interpreters to compilers a bit later on this video. So now for the disadvantages of using an interpreter. The end user needs an interpreter. The speed runs slower than the compiler, since interpreters analyze and converts each line of the source code into machine code before it can be executed, and the end user has to be given the source code. Now let's compare the interpreter and the compiler. Well, the compiler and the interpreter. So the compiler is fast and creates an executable file that runs directly on the CPU. An interpreter is slower as it interprets the code one line at a time. Debugging is more difficult on the compiler, as one error can produce many spurious errors. And in the spurious errors, that was just some errors that might not actually be errors. Then in interpreter is that the debugging is easier. Each line of code is analysed and checked before being executed. More likely to crash the machine code. More likely to crash the computer. The machine code is run directly on the CPU. And then the interpreter, less likely to crash, as the instructions are being carried out either on the interpreter's command line or within a virtual machine environment, which is protecting the computer from being directly accessed by the code. I'll get into virtual machines in a later video. For compilers, it is easier to protect the intellectual property, as the machine code is difficult to understand, because the interpreter is has a weaker intellectual property, as the source code, or bytecode as it says there, has to be available at one time. So that in exactly that secure way, so compiler kind of wins is a good bit then. The compiler uses more memory, since all the extension code needs to be loaded into memory, although tricks like dynamic link libraries lessen the problem. Then the interpreter uses less memory, as the source code only has to be present one line at a time in memory. For the compiler, unauthorized modifications to the code are more difficult. This executable is in the form of machine code, so it's difficult to understand the program flow. But then the interpreter, since it is the source code, it is easier to modify, as the instructions are at a high level language, and so the program flow is easier to understand and modify.